I've known Jon since his GE days, when he was a client of mine at Percolate. He went on to bigger and better things at LinkedIn, and now, much to my delight, is an entrepreneur who has not raised any money.
It's true. It's amazing how many, if you tell people, when you leave LinkedIn, you no longer have a credential. So like when I go to a room and people are like, where do you work? Like, oh, I work at Evidenza. Nobody's a fuck clue. That's where if I say, what I used to work, that did. But the interesting thing about raising money, which you probably know, many of you may know, what I didn't know, is how much people are shocked if you say you didn't raise money. Because in many ways, that is the signal of success. You raise money, not you're actually successful. You actually have a business that makes money. It's that you raise money, which has been a really interesting thing for me to experience. But yeah, we did raise money, and so I'm without 2 credentials now.
Can you tell everyone what Evidenza is and why you're sitting here?
Yeah, sure. I did it. We're talking about B2B marketing. I did a thing at LinkedIn, my credential. See, I'm going to try it out for the second time at that second. Did I mention when I used to work at LinkedIn? The big idea at LinkedIn, I guess, was a very simple one, which is there's all this research into what works in consumer marketing, going back to soap operas. But you do not have the equivalent research in what works in B2B marketing. You do not have space operas or cloud operas, right? You don't have that kind of history, that kind of empirical understanding of what's effective or what's efficient and what's not. So could we just take a lot of ideas that came out of a very specific book called How Brands Grow, which is a book by Brier and Jen Uranic about empirical laws that govern how consumers buy, essentially. Could you replicate that in B2B? Would it work? And it does. So we set that up, this thing called the B2B Institute. And then problem with research to prove that stuff out is it's incredibly slow. It's incredibly expensive. If you could even talk to the people at all in B2B. And it turns out that you can effectively build digital twins of people. Like I can build a digital twin of all of you, and then I can ask you a series of questions in market research, qual or quant, and you'll give responses, believe it or not, that are extremely similar. As synthetic versions of you would give responses that are extremely similar to what human responses from humans like you would give. This is something that people don't really understand today, but there's more and more understanding of it. So we do market research, marketing strategy, or we create digital twins. Then we do a whole series of segmentation, targeting, positioning, qual to inform go-to-market plans. B2B. Thank you.
You have a question?
I do. It's like a lot more boring than what you talked about. But so I was hearing you. I've been hearing you talk about the private tokens. Where I'm hearing in my head is like my own little instance of like the stuff that is right with my brand, that resonates with my buyers. My question is, so my organization has been on a bit of a transformation, I think, on how we talk about ourselves, what we say, like what good looks like. We don't, and that's like opinion at this point versus fact. So how do I know when I have enough of a body of my good stuff to start using Gen AI right now, like at scale? Like, I go around and do a little bit. But I haven't like fired my my copywriting team, because I'm like, if we were using Gen AI significantly right now, I think we'd be like, we signed on the bathwater. Yeah. But I don't know when I'm gonna have, and I don't want to copy other stuff because it's not gonna be as good as what I think of. But like, when do I make that switch? How do I know?
I don't. No, I think it's a great question. I mean, I really, I was on a call yesterday about this.
Yeah.
I do think one part that is, if you work in agencies or consulting, a big part of your job is getting clients to agree to something, right? Like that's a huge part is like getting everybody to say what good looks like. I was having a debate yesterday about whether the sort of AI is capable of that. And it's like the AI can certainly take away what it thinks was good from the things that you did, but getting you to agree on what good is and getting you to sort of claim that space and state it is, I think, still a very human problem. And I don't know that a lot, I don't know that anything, I'm not sure I would say anything has changed in that sort of particular problem in a serious way, in that like to get to the answer to get to the next step, you need to have to answer that question, and I think it feels very human to me.
Yeah, because and just to let you into Medina's in my head, my fear is that I say this, right? I don't know what good looks like, whatever. But how long am I going to let myself say this? Because maybe I'm just afraid of AI. Like that's the other voice that's in my head.
And I think one of the things that was said earlier that I texted John because said we should talk about over is like I sort of think a lot of what's happening with AI right now is like it makes us reflect on. It sort of makes us reflect on the ways we used to work before, right? It's like when all of a sudden content becomes free, you look back on the content that you produce and you're like, well, that was kind of shit anyway. Or it's like I built a manifesto generator with a creative director friend of mine, and some people got mad about it because people on the internet get mad about things. And they were like, yeah, isn't this like a sad world where like, the sort of manifestos are generated by AIs and not human? And since like, well, it only works because like humans are acting like AIs right now, and that like they all write the same manifesto, right? There's a way of writing a manifesto. They all sound the same. They all look the same. The only reason the AI is at all capable of doing it is because there's such a sort of heavy pattern there. And so, it's sort of like, the meeting or the email thing. It's like the conversation about like, oh, well, what's going to happen? The AI is going to write the email and the AI is going to read the email. And it's like, well, there's also a possibility that, my hope is that we recognize that we never needed that email to begin with. We just get rid of it. I think that's unlikely. But, I do think a big part of, and I think that's really positive growth, right? Is that like we sort of look back and we're like, one of my clients is a very large advertising holding company, and we train all their CEOs on what AI is. And, they're all sort of desperate to figure out where to start. And it's like, I think the simplest place, one of the places I tell them to start is like, when you get a brief, you just stick in the AI. Whatever the AI gives you is like, that is like, you have to do better than that. That's like that is now the free answer, right? So you need to be significantly, and I think that makes a lot of us reflect where it's like, oh, well, the content, this thing is able to get to, 90% of the content we used to do. Like, either we could do it for free or we could do much better content, I think are the sort of two paths.
Let's double down on that idea for 1 second. This is a common trope, but I think there's a lot of truth to it, which is that AI will give you the average response. So it'll give you the average brief, it'll give you the average email, it'll give you the average brand position, or whatever it is. So a way to be good is just not to do bad things. Like maybe you can't be good. Maybe what you can do is do less bad things, do fewer bad things, probably proper. So a simple thing I would do is I would take your brand positioning and I would put it and I would just ask any of the AI, what are the most generic, most common words used in this brand positioning? And what Noah said is correct. Everybody's saying the same thing. Like, I want to be good. I want to do good. I want to feel good, right? Basically, it's kind of what it all boils down to. But you can very simply think of, you can quantify this around distinctiveness. How many of these words are distinct? In this sense, it would be how many of these words that are still relevant in the context of this brand positioning are not often used words. How many are rare? How many are common? If your entire brand positioning is incredibly common words, which the AI can quantify for you, you have a generic brand positioning. You have a bad brand positioning. You have an unmemorable brand positioning. So I think one of the beautiful things about AI is it allows us to quantify many things in marketing that were previously unquantifiable. Because frankly, you would never have spent time writing market research to say, what is the most generic shit in here? Right? You wouldn't have wasted your 20 questions on like, what is the dumbest shit that I'm doing? What's the most boring shit that I'm doing? Because you need to go in and tell your board something exceptional. You can't go and tell them something boring. But you can now do that because you have unlimited questions to ask. I wouldn't say you should ask unlimited questions about them, right? Because the more questions you ask, in many cases, like the more confused you get. But in this case, I would just simply say like a good way to was not to be bad and start rooting out the generic stuff, rooting out the common stuff, rooting out the stuff that sounds like your competitors, looks like your competitors, the sea of Saquus. You could do that with your brand codes, like your colors. Are we all blue? Every company's blue because it's the safe color, or the words. And so like it's a very simple, tangible, quantifiable thing that I think is a very valuable way to start. Don't be good, less bad.
Thank you.
No, you mentioned the Amazon in-rate writer replicated. Can you give a little more detail on that? So what you did to get to that, and then what the output usage of that is? Because I'm imagining if you're a scientist and you sort of upload it all of Einstein's work, you would sort of say, okay, now I want to be Einstein with my output. What's happening here?
It's running through a 9-step process. It's a sort of agentic, I guess. Part of that process is like it goes out to different creative directors synthetic creative directors and get it feedback and punch up the lines, and then it sort of goes through review. Ultimately, the goal for that project was not to replace the copywriters. It was that, it's like Amazon is a company with 1 million people, and the vast majority of them the vast majority of the copy is not written by copywriters. And there are a few really, really amazing ones. And the question is sort of how can you get more out of those people? And this project started as like, what would the world's best thesaurus look like? Right. And that was sort of really the goal. And it was to sort of accelerate. And they used it to write, 70% of the copy for their holiday dynamic creative.
So it's a lot more than GPT. Is it?
Yeah, it's a whole. It is not just a GPT. It's a whole lot of. I think it is fair to call it an agent. It runs a multi-step process. It loops back on itself. It does a bunch of different things. Yeah, I think. But ultimately, what makes it work is that it wasn't just sort of understanding kind of like how does this person approach copy. It was also like. Understanding, the steps that they go through. And it's like, how would you respond to this if a junior copywriter did this to you? And that's how we ended up with like, so there's a charmer creative director, and then there's a funny creative director, and there's a serious creative director, and they all give feedback, and then it sort of goes through multiple rounds, and then finally it gets handed back to the person. And the idea, and again, I think this is a big sort of point to take away, is like, there's so many AI projects where the goal is to get to 100%. And like make perfect things. I get into a lot of arguments with a certain company in the room about this particular one, where I think like the goal for this was to get to 40%, right? Like, what if you could start people at 40% instead of 2, right? Like, and so I think too often, I was just having this conversation. We're doing a big project to rebuild email suppression. Right now, very large company uses an Excel spreadsheet to handle all their email suppression lists. And we were like, that's stupid. And they were like, that's stupid. They recognize that. And so we have been building a tool to help them identify and choose the right email suppression. But a big part of that, and like, what I've been advocating for is like, okay, well, the thing we need to know beforehand is like, what is the accuracy rate of the humans who currently choose through this spreadsheet the email suppression rules, right? Because like, we can't judge this AI against 100%. It's not going to be perfect. But the humans are definitely not perfect. This is a like 150 row email suppression list that you're supposed to choose all the right suppressions from, like, just by looking at it. Like and so we have to be realistic about like, what is the target that we're trying to feed here, right? And it's like, in that case, I think it's more like 60%, right? So it's like, that becomes a much more fair way to think about it.
Could I ask you a question, Joe?
Yeah, of course. I have a pet theory.
Great.
Does it? Which is that I think AI is sort of going to be a more rational consumer of brands. And that may affect how we create content, assuming that sort of people continue to be influenced by AI, right? They are on ChatGPT, they ask what car to buy, they ask what hotel to stay in, whatever. That like the sort of influence dynamics of influencing model are probably different than influencing human. And my guess is it's a slightly more rational influence model. And like, will that have downstream effects on content? But the first question really is, do you think that there's any truth to the idea that like these things are going to be more rational? They're going to be more rational than humans.
It's a very interesting question. I've been very surprised by how emotional the robots are, actually. That's been a big shock for me. I just have to think these things become a barbell. Like, I think there will continue to be emotional luxury brands that give people the ability to signal, and the AI will intuit that about you, will know that about you, right? And so in a decision where you don't care about that, it'll be extremely rational. In the decisions where you care about kind of the signaling aspect or social status, it will become more emotional. So I think it will just kind of become more bifurcated. But in general, I'm amazed by the fact that the robots are as emotional as they are. Let me come back to this point. Like, a thing that I hear a lot from people, two things I'm struck by about AI and the discourse around AI, which we're talking about today, is number one, everyone defaults to creative. That's the number one thing everyone talks about. Like Sam Altman, even on a recent podcast, said the first thing that AI automated, do you know what he says the first thing AI automated was? We've been talking about it for the last 20 minutes. Copyright. Which is just generally interesting to think about. Like, I would imagine most of you don't think AI has automated anything in marketing fully yet, but he's of the view that it's already been automated, which I think is largely true by the fact that you could have 9 steps to do that, right? But you basically automated it. But everyone talks about creative, number one. And number two, people are very caught up on the idea that you get average insights out of AI, like obsessed with this idea. Like the number of people who are like, well, how will I be in my focus group? And I'll see like the one person who like winces when I say that. It will give me this insight that is going to change my business. And it's just like, this is just fun, very, very fun. Like, I don't actually think the creative uses are all that interesting frankly, for AI. It's going to become so competitive so quickly. I think that will go away. It's going to be very hard to do stuff there unless you're absolute best in the world. But also the average stuff. I mean, so actually on the average point, I did ask, I was like, I'm tired of getting this question. I just asked GPT, I'm like, what is it great, unique insight that like a Diageo marketer would get from like a focus group? And it gave me an Irish person, stereotypical average trader. Average born out in some cases. And it was a person drinking a non-alcoholic beer and saying, oh yeah, this tastes great, which is ostensibly like a positive thing you would say. But actually in the end, it's like, but there's like, in talking about it in this positive way, it's like hide this underlying, you lose something when you lose the alcohol. You lose kind of the sense of freedom and relaxation and connection. And actually, this is not a good thing, even though I'm talking about this as a good thing. So you can debate whether or not this is an incredibly emotional, incisive understanding of the situation. But I'm amazed by how good your robots are understanding the emotional stuff, to come back to emotion, because I think they're going to become very much attuned to whatever you want. Like, you will shape the machine, it will shape you back, of course, but they're going to be much more emotional. Like, you're probably all going to have boyfriends and girlfriends, you know, whether you call it a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or if it's a synthetic CMO or a synthetic CEO. And that's going to be a really interesting second braid or simulation that we are all going through every day with this other person who you probably will talk to more than your husband or your wife or your kids, which is a very weird thing. I talk to AI maybe more than anybody else in my life now, which is a very strange concept.
I love your thought about, I was sitting here thinking that we're talking a lot about the things we do today, content and manifestos and emails, and how AI will help improve the efficiencies. Where have you seen where AI is being used well to help us think about things we're not thinking about, where we can be disruptive, whether it's products, use cases, customer experiences? Like, have you seen the AI be able to, especially when you talked about bringing disparate data together from different sources, that's so difficult, and how AI could do that? I'm curious if you're seeing that happening.
It's very hard. Somebody asked me yesterday, this is a company that is trying to figure out like second and third order effects of very strange things. They call them gray rhinos, I would call them black swans. But their idea was, like, we already thought leadership around what if, for example, China crashed Starlink, right? Or all satellites, and you had no access to satellites and, right, GPS. How would that change the markets? And how would that change society? And how would that change whatever it is? Yeah. I haven't run that experiment, so I don't know. I'd like to actually kind of do it with this company. It's a cool idea. But my sense is that one of the magical things AI does, it just has this incredible ability to generate enormous quantities of ideas. And in fact, they say quantity has a quality all of its own. And I think that's an important idea. People get tired and they run out of ideas. AI doesn't get tired, doesn't run out of ideas. So I think actually the way to get to a very novel insight isn't to have 3 very novel insights. It's to have 300 insights and have 297 of them be shitty and have 3 be good. And so I think just the idea that you can now generate without constraints that many ideas, you will and then probably have the AI rank them on novelty, frankly. And there's people at Stanford who talked about using AI as a judge to judge novelty. Like, that would be great. Like, give me 400 ideas, judge them on novelty, also show them to our smartest people in the company, and kind of that blend, give Rich the way to get to that insight.
I also, though, I did some work with a company called System One, the creative testing company, and they also sort of have an innovation product. And, we were testing sort of like ways of doing sort of innovation work with AI. I think one of my takeaways is just like, and this is like sort of back to the point I was making on the sabotage stuff, is like, a lot of the challenge with innovation is not that people don't have good ideas for what to do. It's that like you've got to move it through the company, right? And so it's like I'm not totally positive that what we need is more good product ideas or unique ideas or I mean I think it's actually kind of funny. I end up talking because I do this conference to a lot of marketing SaaS companies, and many of them had started in the last few years. They're all doing AI stuff, and many of them are absolutely sure that the biggest problem in marketing was that CMOs need more ideas. And I'm like, have you ever met a CMO? Like, I'm not sure that's in the top 100 problems that a CMO has, right? Like and so I don't know. I sort of like, I try to step back as much as possible. And I think like we ask these questions and we sort of, I mean, there's certainly places where we know the AI, like, I was listening to a podcast yesterday. There's this AI 2027 thing that came out. If you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. They sort of attempted to answer the question of sort of like, what are the second, third, fourth order effects by writing a story and using that sort of narrative as a way to think about it. And listening to a podcast about it with very, very smart people. And, it's like, in sort of science and medicine, and they were talking about sort of, why haven't we yet seen sort of more kind of combinatorial stuff come out? And, the other thing is just we have to remember it's sort of incredibly early. And, these models, like, I think one of the other big sort of changes, especially inside enterprises, like, you can build things now, and it's like, if you take the AI copy tool, like we built that originally, there's a different model out there, and now you have reasoning models and you can just plug them in, and all of a sudden things you build get significantly better a week later and cheaper. It's crazy. I mean, it's just like, and that's just going to keep happening, and you plug these new models in, and, I mean, I think there's a lot of really, I don't think we've kind of fully internalized what that's really going to mean. I also sort of, that's my big sort of, another great reason why you should just build stuff right now, even if it kind of is not good enough yet. To your questions, like the model that comes, GPT-5 is going to be out later this year. It's going to be a reasoning model. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Presumably it'll be better than O3 Mini, which is a pretty good model. Like if you build something now that's like pretty good and, GPT-5 comes out and it's significantly better and it makes a real leap, or it's next year or whatever, it's like, you're going to it's a drop, replace, all of a sudden everything you do got 30% better. Like it's a pretty crazy possibility.
Do you see companies?
Add something on this topic.
Yeah.
Another thing that drives me crazy about the marketing advertising complex is the obsession with new. And everyone assumes that innovation has to be new. In fact, I think you have to just listen to Bezos. People always ask me what's new. I tell them, like, ignore what's new, like, focus on what's old. Like, what doesn't change, right? Don't ask what's going to change, ask what's not going to change. You can build a business on what doesn't change. So often what innovation looks like in practical terms is like, it's just convenience or it's accessibility. So it's like, actually making this bottle from glass to cans means it's lighter and they can carry it more places because it won't break in my bag and the liquid won't get everywhere. And so the innovation isn't much. It's just changing it from being glass to being, tin or aluminum, right? But that means it's more accessible and more affordable and more affordable and all these things, and it's just better. People buy it more. We progress sales 3, 4, 5, 6% a year. But innovation is more like seeing the present clearly, right, than it is predicting the future. And I'm not criticizing you, obviously, about that. I'm literally just kind of saying, like, this is something that has driven me crazy for a long time. So honestly, like, use AI to understand things that are going on in your business that you know super well, but don't understand quite as well as you want to understand, even though you think you understand it super well. And probably in there is the actual innovation that you need. It is not some new thing. You're not Uber. You're probably...
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the sort of best, and certainly within our organization, the most helpful use cases is just surfacing. So we record all our meetings now, and it runs through AI. It pulls out all the key points. Like in Percolate days, we had 70 people on the sales team. We had them all file field reports in Salesforce. All the field reports went out. And so now it just all runs through AI, and people don't have to fill it out. You don't have to make them do more work. People are much happier to not have to fill out Salesforce fields. And then also at the end of the week, instead of sort of having our weekly meeting where you review account status, we now have the AI go through and write statuses for each based on what the last status was, whatever meetings happened that week. And it's is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it as good as the humans used to? 100%. And is it a whole lot less painful? 200%. Like, it's just, and so, but that kind of surfacing of internal knowledge, again, I think to John's point, it's like so many people are focused on the creative, or focused on the ability for it to output stuff. It's like it's a ability to read is incredible, and its ability to synthesize, to do all these things. It's like so many interesting opportunities. It's like if you work in a service business, like I now do, like the entire goal is to spend no time on anything that doesn't pay you. Right? And so it's like, can we turn all of that over to AI? Sure.
Yeah, so question, a comment, right? So I was intrigued what you said about removing your BDR team, and I am in an AI company, so I say you got your own dog feed, you got a brain called Octane, and I tried kind of ran BDR teams for a long time as well, and I tried using our own technology with agentic workflows in order to start replacing the BDRs, and I couldn't get to do it. And the issue that we had, the lot about the content creation, we just all of that worked well, and in our case we went after enterprise marketing. But the best BDRs who really did the research, really understood the target, had everything right, which was the byte, do by data, etc. The moral of the story is, and I think I originally talked about it as well, I don't think it's about replacing humans with an AI agent. I think it's really about to think out what are the tasks and the jobs that need to get done, and how do we start automating those workflows. And I think in a lot of cases, any workflow that we have within marketing consists of a number of people. So if you take the BDR process, right, so you need people that build the list, add the list, how do you do that research? How do you want to tailor it? What is your off-phrase? What are the customer that you want to represent each or the so there's so many different steps that you get in there, and then it's probably get to Vigente. And I agree with, sorry, point to my name, but general left, like there's still a mutancy. And I also agree that the biggest disruption could come from just executing better at scale. But there's love to hear the points in the room, like this is about replacing humans, or is this about automating tasks and workflows?
I mean, yeah, I agree. I feel pretty strongly that we can't be sure that it's not going to replace humans. I just don't think we know. I think it will. So, I would certainly say that in my experience, I think that what I have seen, I can say firsthand, is that you can build tooling to amplify the output of really good people by tags. And I've seen it. I have evidence that is true. And I think, the second order effect of that is pretty naturally that you have less people. Whether that's going to be no people, I think the arguments are pretty strong that these models are going to continue to get better and they're going to continue to be able to operate independently. I just signed up for a thing called Devi, which is a AI coding assistant that sits in your Slack. You just give it access to your repos and you tell it what you want it to do, and it just goes off and does it, and then it tells you when it's ready, and you just review its code. And so, it's like it's $500 a month. Like, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than me hiring another engineer. I just took a marketing project that we had and I flipped it over there. So, and I told the team that I'm not going to touch it anymore, and we just have to work with Devin. So, it's like, it's just so hard to say. I think in the short term, the answer is I also think this is sort of problematic for a lot of organizations who moved out expensive people with a lot of knowledge. It's like really talented people who adopt this stuff, you can just amplify what they do incredibly. Things are being short. That's a lot of what's going to happen.
So something related to result was it? What Marcel was saying, and something I've been thinking a lot about. I'm curious your perspective of this. So if you, a preface first. So if you have ever looked at a visualization of the layers of what goes on in an LLM, like when it identifies digits in an image, you find that it decomposes these things in layers in a way that is not the way a human would do it. It doesn't say, where are the loops? Okay, that could be a 9 or a 6. It doesn't actually do it the way a human would do it. All right, so here's my question. Today, we're imposing this, automate the workflow, automate the process we know, implement the agents with loops. Give me the humorous creative director, the this creative director, the that creative director. We're imposing a workflow and a structure in a typical, linear programming methodology layered on top of something that does not internally actually work that way. So it begs the question, is our imposition of these human digestible workflows actually not ultimately where we're going to wind up, and that actually limits the ability of the AI underneath? All it does is give us the illusion of control and a way to impart some of our knowledge, but there may be better ways.
I really like that question. I generally agree. Though I'm not sure we have a full understanding of how our brains work either. And so, it may be more reflective of that model, but I do think fundamentally fundamentally these are probabilistic machines, right? And we know that. One challenge is that they are running on deterministic computers, right? So they are sort of running within a sort of deterministic universe of code and software, and they have to, you have to integrate lots of systems together, right? Those are all sort of deterministic workflows and things like that. I would also just say increasingly, even just over the last 6 months, the ability to run agents non-deterministically has exploded because of these reasoning models. So the sort of GPT-4 level models were not really capable of sort of fully open-ended agentic work where you didn't sort of give it a deterministic process. They were much less capable. And part of what we've seen in the shift and why this is why there's more agents, why I can use Devin, is because these better models, along with a whole bunch of other techniques, have allowed it to do that. But then I guess the last piece is I think it's a mistake to think about these models in a vacuum, right? They ultimately exist inside these broader systems. So it's the most powerful tools out there, they include the model as being probabilistically thinking on its own, but they have to tie into data warehouses, right? Which require deterministic access and role-based permissioning and whatever else is going to be there, right? And to do a really good job, they are ultimately going to have to sort of tie these two together. That's also why I think the coding, there's so much focus on coding agents, because coding is a sort of meta solution to any problem, right? It's if I could code my own solution to this, then I could sort of figure out whatever the best approach is, regardless. So I don't think I answered at all, but I think it's a little bit of just where the models are and sort of being realistic about what we can do with them right now. A year ago, it's called React is the sort of main model where you had it plan and then come back and plan and then come back. And it's it just didn't work, the GPT-4 level models.
There's an important thing in here. When the models, so if the model just gives you an answer, how do you know you should trust that answer or not? Right? That's actually not that useful to you. So your point I take around maybe there's a more brilliant alien language they could be parsing in and reasoning in, and that gets a better result. Let's say it does that and gives you the answer. You have no idea how it got to that answer. Right? Why are you going to trust that answer? I don't think you will. In the counterfactual, where it shows you in human terms, here's my reasoning, my logic, my steps, here's my answer. I think you've seen that you now are more likely to trust it, and more importantly, maybe to explain it to your boss, or your boss is a boss. So to know about can they do it a different way that doesn't require talking to humans? Yes. Who are they working with to get these things done in the most cases? Who's paying the bills? Humans. So they're thinking in the language you care about, reason with you, explain to you. And that's actually how they will bootstrap themselves properly to being able to do whatever you're talking with us. And the human interface is that's what's so interesting about it, actually. When the Chinese model made that available, that immediately Google and immediately OpenAI also made that available. They showed you how it thought, because that's the most compelling part of it. Is how it thinks, how it reasons, what it gets wrong, what it gets right. It's humanist that is very interesting, actually, despite the fact that these are robots.
Have you ever tried taking your 9-step model, explaining the model to a GPT or another LLM, and then asking it if there is a more compact, simplified way where if you did it that way, it thinks, you would actually get better answers. That would be interesting to see what its answer to that is.
Yeah, I've tried that. It is not as good as you would think it was in that particular case. And in many of the, I mean, these are where I personally have found the limits is like, I do find that, again, because like a lot of that was born out of the sort of experience that this copywriter had of like how you actually not just write good copy, but like how you get it bought off by the CMO group of Amazon, right? Like there's all these things, and that's where, I mean, I totally agree with John, and sort of like the real kind of underlying message from the sabotage thing is like, we are still, like the bottleneck is still humans, right? And like we are still like for the meantime, we are not organizations run by AI, we're organizations run by humans. CMOs have to make decisions about what good looks like. If you don't have those decisions made, then it's going to be very hard to sort of have the downstream effects. And, you know, it's like, yeah, I think that's kind of holding, I think one more.
I guess then my final question is a different side here, which is the implementation of what you're talking about, back to bureaucracy. And are you seeing that, you know, you talked a lot about, you know, go out, build, try. I love that. Are you seeing it happening in a very decentralized way? Are you seeing that companies are building teams that just know this, and then there's use cases that come in? I'm curious about like the practice. And the selling in a minute.
I think we're seeing everything. I mean, I think the biggest trend is like, obviously there's a land grab right now inside organizations, right? You know, I can tell you firsthand, like I've got a client we're hired by this CMO. They had a real head start. They had some sort of like stumbles along the way. Then the like CIO came in to like be the distributor of all AI services, including marketing, right? So it's like a big part of it is just like everybody is looking at this because the CEO is telling everybody that they have to be AI first. And so everybody's like, I'm going to win this and I'm going to take over everything and I'm going to manage it. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's one big trend. You know, I think that it's an interesting technology in that, like, I think the last few sort of tech revolutions we've gone through in the last 20 years have been much more bottoms up, right? Like we had, you know, like smartphones, you had social media, you have all these things where it like really did bubble up. And, you know, this is sort of coming both ways, I think. What I have seen just personally is like, you know, I think there are 4 set of tools that it looks like are going to be distributed by the sort of CIO, CTO, right? Sort of like basic chat or basic sort of access to data, basic things. That seems to like the CIOs can win that. But then, you know, the argument we've made with the CMO clients of ours is that like, you know, when those folks try to build the marketing workflow, it's just not in good. Like because they don't know anything about marketing. Their pitch, though, obviously, is like, hey, well, let's hire all the marketing people. We could do it ourselves. And so I, you know, it's a weird moment out there for sure. You wrote all. It's very competitive.
Yeah, it's both. I mean, you have your people that are the silent cyborgs, as they're called, that were doing their job. You know, are much more machine than they are man or woman at this point. You have a lot of CMOs. I mean, I think it's generally a centralizing technology, though. Yeah. I mean, there are a handful of big companies that basically provision all the tools. Generally speaking, at big companies that are very risk averse, it tends to be centralized as well, right? Doesn't mean that's actually what's going on, but at least that's how it's working. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting opportunity, as Noah said. I mean, it is a paradigm shift. Like,